the Illuminati, Satanism, drugs and the music industry. The plan was to use both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones as the means to transform an entire generation into followers of the New Age, the dawning of Aquarius followers who could help the Illuminati mold the future of our present-day leaders, who in turn were then deployed to work within our schools, legal system and political arenas. Today it's happening again, via the likes of Madonna, Lady Gaga and Jay-Z etc. In his book, The Ultimate Evil, 1b, investigator author Maury Terry writes that between 1966 and 1967, a satanic group, the Process Church Cult, PCC, sought to recruit the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. He also goes on to implicate the PCC in the Charles Manson and son of Sam, David Berkowitz, multiple murders. A key link between the Rolling Stones and the PCC is Kenneth Anger, a follower of Aleister Crowley, the founding father of modern-day Satanism. Anger, born in 1927, and a child Hollywood movie star, became a devoted disciple of Crowley. Crowley died in 1947 allegedly due to complications of his heroin addiction, but before dying, Terry alleges he succeeded in establishing satanic covens in many U.S. cities including Hollywood. Anger, now 84 years old, like Crowley, is a magus and appears to be the heir to Crowley and a follower of Thelma. Anger was 20 years old when Crowley died. In that same year, 1947, Anger was already producing and directing films which variously merge surrealism with homoeroticism and the occult. During 1966 to 1967, when the PCC is reported to be recruiting in London, Anger was also the image detail. Kenneth Anger, Lucifer Rising. Author Tony Sanchez, Keith Richards' bodyguard, writes in Up and Down with the Rolling Stones, 1a, and describes that the Stones, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards and their girlfriends Marianne Faithfull and Anita Pallenberg, listened spellbound as Anger turned them on to Crowley's powers and ideas. Anger worked on a film dedicated to Aleister Crowley, called Lucifer Rising. And Anger explains what the film is about. Lucifer is a teenage rebel, so must be played by a teenage boy. 1. It's typecasting. I'm a pagan and the film is a real invocation of Lucifer. I'm much realer than von Stroheim. The film contained real black magicians, a real ceremony, real altars, real human blood, and a real magic circle consecrated with blood and cum. The film brought together the PCC, the Manson family cult, and the Rolling Stones. The music for the film was composed by Mick Jagger. Process Church cult follower Marianne Faithfull went all the way to Egypt to participate in the film's depiction of a black mass. The part of Lucifer was played by a guitarist of a California rock group, Bobby Psell, a member of the Manson family, and Anger's homosexual lover. A few months after filming started, Psell returned to California and committed the first of the Manson family's series of gruesome murders. Psell was later arrested and is now serving a life sentence in prison along with Manson. Robert Kenneth Bobby Psell was born 6 November 1947 and is serving a life sentence for killing music teacher and fellow associate Gary Hinman on 27 July 1969, and has been imprisoned since his arrest for that crime. As described in the book Helter Skelter, Hinman was killed for money and property that Manson claimed Hinman owed the family. Image detail. Robert Kenneth Bobby Psell. Accompanying Psell that night were Susan Atkins and Mary Brunner, both later involved in other murders. Psell claims that Hinman supplied him with a batch of bad, or weak, mescaline, acts similarly to other psychedelic agents, that Psell in turn sold to the Straight Satan's motorcycle gang. When the bikers demanded their money back, Psell went to Hinman, who refused to pay. While Psell, Atkins, and Brunner held him captive in his own home in an attempt to convince him to refund the money. Manson, whom Psell had phoned, showed up and sliced Hinman's face and ear with a long knife or bayonet. Psell stabbed Hinman to death the next day. Afterwards, he wrote, "Political piggy" on a wall in Hinman's blood. On the 6th August 1969, Psula was arrested while sleeping in the back of one of Hinman's vehicles. Having lost his star performer, Anger then asked Mick Jagger to play Lucifer, and finally settled upon Anton LaVey, author of the Satanic Bible and head of the First Church of Satan, to play the part. The film was released in 1969 with the title, Invocation to My Demon Brother. In London, Anger had succeeded in recruiting the girlfriend of one of the Rolling Stones, Anita Pallenberg, who had met the Stones in 1965, to Satanism. She immediately began sexual relations with 3 out of the 5 members of the group. Anger, commenting on Anita, said, "I believe that Anita is, for want of a better word, a witch." The occult unit within the Stones was Keith and Anita ... and Brian. "You see, Brian was a witch too," Tony Sanchez writes of Pallenberg, and states, "She was obsessed with black magic and began to carry a string of garlic with her everywhere, even to bed, to ward off vampires. She also had a strange mysterious salt shaker for holy water which she used for some of her rituals. Her ceremonies became increasingly secret, and she warned me never to interrupt her when she was working on a spell." 3. In her bedroom she kept a huge, ornate carved chest, which she guarded so jealously that I assumed it was her drug stash. The house was empty one day, and I decided to take a peep inside. The drawers were filled with scraps of bone, wrinkled skin and fur from some strange animals. 4. Image detail. Kenneth Anger, Invocation to My Demon Brother. In 1980, the 17-year-old caretaker of Keith Richards' New England estate was found shot to death in Anita Pallenberg's bed. 4. The death, ruled as suicide, was with Pallenberg's gun. Richards' house was located near the East Coast headquarters of the Process Church. It's been alleged, as I can't seem to find any other references to the Midnight newspaper other than from the various sources connected to the writings of what I'm covering here, so according to an article in the referred to English newspaper Midnight, a Connecticut police officer, Michael Passero, who had responded to the suicide, reported strange singing from the woods a quarter-mile from the Richards mansion. The newspaper continues, "There have been several bizarre satanic rituals in the area over the past 5 years. A local reporter attributed the outbreak of occultism to rich people taking acid." In 1967 the Stones released their album titled, Their Satanic Majesty's Request. On the 27th of February 1977 at Toronto's Harbour Castle Hotel, Richard was found in possession of 22 grams of heroin. In 1994 Richard said of this image, "It's something you drag around behind you like a long shadow, even though that was nearly 20 years ago, you cannot convince some people that I'm not a mad drug addict. So I've still got that image in my baggage." 4. In 2010, Peter Hitchens wrote of Richards that he is a ... capering streak of living gristle who ought to be exhibited as a warning to the young of what drugs can do to you even if you're lucky enough not to choke on your own vomit. 5. Though it must be said he's a superb guitarist, and considering he's 68 now, it's amazing he's still a living piece of gristle. Image detail. Keith Richard. One thing for certain, and around this particular time and among these people quoted, Satanism, the occult and drugs were no doubt top of the agenda, though to me the biggest satanic thing being around, was and still is that of the devil's dust itself, heroin. Crowley proudly named himself, the Great Beast, and was one of the first Westerners to seriously study Buddhism and yoga. He radically redesigned the traditional tarot card, thus the Crowley deck was born. You could say since the 60s and to date, Crowley has been rediscovered, and in the past he's been reinterpreted often by certain groups, such as the Beats, that is the Beat Generation, were a group of American writers who came to prominence in the 1950s, mainly because of their cultural modern-day experiences that they wrote about and inspired them. Later on they were sometimes called beatniks, and where central elements of beat culture include a rejection of mainstream values, the experimentation with drugs and alternate forms of sexuality, and an interest in Eastern religions. Image detail. A. Crowley. In 2002, a BBC poll described Crowley as being the 73rd greatest Briton of all time, whilst he has influenced, and been referred to by numerous writers, musicians and filmmakers, including Alan Moore, Oz Osbourne, Jimmy Page, David Bowie, Kenneth Anger, and who according to Anger, the greatest living magician, Harry Everett Smith, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. He has also been cited as a key influence on many later esoteric groups and individuals, including figures like Kenneth Grant, a British occultist and head of the magical order, previously known as the Typhonian Ordo Templi Orientis, but which is now referred to as the Typhonian Order. The already mentioned Father of Wicca, Gerald Gardner, and to some degree, artist Tostin Osman Spare, who developed distinctive magical techniques, including automatic writing, automatic drawing and sigillization, that is signs and symbols that are supposed to have magical powers. Among other admirers of Crowley, are and have been, many Freemasons, hippies, punks and supporters of industrial culture, and even more so today by goths, and followers of the controversial rock singer Marilyn Manson, a stage name formed from the names of actress Marilyn Monroe and convicted murderer Charles Manson. On 3 April 2002, Maria St. John filed in Los Angeles Superior Court accusing Marilyn Manson of providing her adult daughter, Jennifer Sim, with cocaine and instructing her to drive while under the influence. On August 2, 2007, former band member Stephen Pogo/Madonna Wayne Gacy filed a lawsuit against Manson for unpaid partnership proceeds, seeking $20 million in back pay. Several details from the case was leaked to the press, and in November 2007, additional papers were filed saying that Manson purchased a child's skeleton and masks made of human skin. He also allegedly bought stuffed animals, such as a grizzly bear and 2 baboons and a collection of Nazi memorabilia. Crowley has become a perennial icon of countercultural rebellion, and the Sunday Times named him one of their 1,000 makers of the 20th century. Image detail. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, in 1967. In 1967 the Beatles included him on the People We Like cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, in 1967. The album contains an alleged fantasized version of an LSD trip, called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, or LSD for short. Though it's possible there's a double hidden meaning of the lyrics, and more likely in reference of Lucifer, as in Lucifer in the Sky with the Diamonds. Venus is otherwise called the jewel in the sky, and also known by many Satanists as Lucifer. The sound in the loop of this track is also the subject of much controversy, being widely interpreted as some kind of secret message. McCartney later told his biographer Barry Miles, that in the summer of 1967 a group of kids came up to him complaining about a lewd message hidden in it when played backwards. He told them, "You're wrong, it's actually just, it really couldn't be any other." So he took them to his house to play the record backwards to them, and it turned out that the passage sounded very much like, "We'll fuck you like Superman." McCartney recounted to Miles that his immediate reaction had been, "Oh my God." It has also been interpreted as, "Will Paul come back as Superman?" Though I'm not sure of those interpretations, as I too have heard it, and sounds more like, "We will fuck you, manish, Superman." The Beatles album was released 20 years after Crowley's death in 1947, and its title song began with the lyrics, "It was 20 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play" probably has reference to Crowley, as I've said, considering on the front of the album's cover features a picture of Aleister Crowley, alongside Marlene Dietrich, Carl Gustav Jung, W.C. Fields, Diana Dors, Elvis Presley, James Dean, Bob Dylan, Marilyn Monroe and many other famous people. The album to date has sold over 32 million copies worldwide. Though for some odd reason it's been said Sgt. Pepper is linked to Pete Best's, the original drummer before Ringo Starr, uncle, who served during the World War II, and whom Lennon wore his medals on the front cover, though that wouldn't fit in with the It was 20 years ago today. 6. Image detail. Jimmy Page outside Boleskine. Let's hope he didn't get that London taxi, from London. Led Zeppelin's guitarist, Jimmy Page, bought Crowley's House of Horrors Boleskine, located on Loch Ness, where allegedly Crowley performed his satanic magic, including blood sacrifices. Crowley was buried inside a dark chamber in Boleskine. Crowley's most famous teaching was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Page had inscribed in the vinyl on Zeppelin's third album, Led Zeppelin III, "Do what thou wilt. So meet it be." 7. Many of their songs are fantastically mesmerizing, with mystical meanings and references to the occult throughout, and have Masonic undertones in their songs such as Stairway to Heaven and The Battle of Evermore etc. Ozzy Osbourne once confessed in an interview, "I really wish I knew why I've done some of the things I've done over the years. I don't know if I'm a medium for some outside source. Whatever it is, frankly, I hope it's not what I think it is." Satan. 1. Hit Parada, February, 1978, p.24. Image detail. Young Ozzy Osbourne. Jim Morrison, superstar of The Doors, died mysteriously on 3 July 1971. Was deeply involved in the occult. Morrison married his wife in Wicca ceremony, where they stood inside the pentagram and drank one another's blood. Morrison said, "I met the spirit of music, an appearance of the devil in a Venice canal. Running, I saw a Satan, or Satyr, pan, moving beside me, a fleshly shadow of my secret mind." The Lost Writings of Jim Morrison, p. 36-38. Ray Manzarek of The Doors says of Morrison, "He was not a performer. He was not an entertainer. He was not a showman. He was a shaman. He was possessed." While Jim Morrison, he was staying at the Chateau Marmont. He spent a few wild nights with a buxom neighbor, once waking up in a tangle of bloody sheets after they shared champagne glasses of each other's blood. Pamela Desbas, Rock's Bottom, p. 208. It's alleged many other rock artists studied Crowley such as, my old mate Marx Bolan, David Bowie, Sting etc. Image detail. Jim Morrison. Alongside the introduction of hallucinogenic drugs in 1967, you also saw the beginning of mass open-air rock concerts, where in the following 2 years, over 4 million predominantly young people attended a series of almost a dozen of these kinds of festivals, and where many became guinea pigs of an allegedly planned wide-scale drug experiment. Mind-blowing and destroying, if badly mixed or made hallucinogenic drugs such as PCP, STP and LSD, that you could say had been heavily endorsed by the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's album, were freely distributed at these kinds of concerts. When in turn those millions would then return to their hometowns and become messengers and advocates of the new drug culture, or what came to be called the New Age. The first annual Monterey International Pop Festival was the first rock festival where over 100,000 youngsters attended. It's alleged the real purpose of the festival was the widespread distribution of new hallucinogenic drugs such as LSD, and where obviously thousands of young teenagers were introduced to these new kinds of drugs. As was hundreds of thousands of us introduced to ease ecstasy MDMA during the late 1980s rave scene, and which is as popular today as it was back then. Experimentation with LSD began in the early 60s, in the Ashbury section of San Francisco. The project was run by a joint CIA British intelligence task force under the codename Project MKUltra. 1. Part of the project called for the free distribution of 5,000 tablets of LSD through a commune known as Ken Kesey's Merry Pranksters. LSD's after effects were then closely studied. In the Playboy interviews with John Lennon and Yoko Ono, by David Sheff and G. Barry Golson, on p. 123 Lennon says, "We must always remember to thank the CIA and the Army for LSD, by the way. That's what people forget." Image detail. Ken Kesey's Merry Pranksters bus. Kesey had been convicted for drug dealing, and became famous for driving around California in a painted-up bus with his commune, the Merry Pranksters, allegedly distributing LSD-laced Kool-Aid to the unsuspecting. Kersey is best known for his novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1962, 8. To us Brits and Europeans, Kool-Aid is a brand of flavored drink mix owned by the Kraft Foods Company, and dates back to 1927. The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test is a work of literary journalism by Tom Wolfe depicting the life of Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. And then following on from Kesey, the term, drinking the Kool-Aid, 9, is a phrase and metaphor, used in the U.S., that means to become a firm believer in something, to accept an argument or philosophy wholeheartedly or blindly without critical examination. The term originated with the November 1978 Jonestown massacre, where members of the People's Temple were said to have committed suicide by drinking Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. Image detail. The effects of LSD, which I too have taken on numerous occasions, can make some people psychotic, along with the inability to understand reality, and you can get incredible fits of laughter, or experience wild hallucinations, like the time I once thought I was being chased by wire wool Brillo cleaning pad. For many, this psychosis can be termed a bad trip, which could, and has led to feelings of suicide. One of my friends was convinced he could fly when he decided to jump off the third floor of a building. As he crashed to the ground, he was then run over by a passing car. He amazingly lived, but is now confined to a wheelchair as a paraplegic. When someone is given LSD without their knowledge, the psychosis-producing capabilities of the drug are tenfold, and it's possible the victim will be left with permanent brain damage. Another bad side effect is called a flashback, whereas you can momentarily forget where you are, or what you're even doing. One Hells Angel fellow I knew of had been taking LSD for a few days on the trot, and a couple of days later, the effects had worn off and he was speeding down the motorway with a girlfriend on the back. All of a sudden he simply stepped off his motorcycle, his body was tossed and spun all over the road. As he smashed his body on the ground, his girlfriend was tragically killed. When he came to in the hospital, he was asked what did he remember of the accident. He said, absolutely nothing, other than he thought he had pulled up and stopped at the curb, and decided to get off his bike and buy a packet of cigarettes. The effects of LSD, and according to the strength of the drug, can stay in your system for up to 3 days or more. Back in the mid-1980s, I was on remand in Wormwood Scrubs Prison, in South London. There were 5 or 6 members from a Hells Angels gang, who were also on remand for chopping up and killing some rival from another gang. Word got around the jail that the Hells Angels had got some acid into the prison, and they were giving it away free to anyone who fancied a trip that weekend. I willingly accepted, as did around 60 other prisoners on my wing. It was a mad few days that followed. I was banged up with a bloke who refused to participate, so we were in a cell approximately 9 feet by 8 feet with 2 beds and 2 cabinets in, which leaves an aisle of about 2 feet wide by 9 feet long, as the sole room to pace up and down on. It was the strongest acid I have ever taken, stronger than Superman tabs, microdots and even window panes at that time. The acid we were taking was homemade by the Hells Angels. It was sent in under the guise of being an artist painting pad. One of the sheets around 14 inches by 7 inches had been submerged into the LSD, and it was this impregnated sheet that was then cut up into tiny tabs, no more than 5 millimeters square. Some of the prisoners really had bad trips and freaked out. Many who had taken acid before knew what to expect, but must have still been surprised by its strength. I relatively had a bad trip, because I was convinced the cell was infested with cockroaches, which most of the cells were anyway, but in this instance, they were the size of rats, and I could see hundreds of them, crawling all over the floor and up the walls. I was like the maid in the cartoon Tom and Jerry, when she starts screaming out and stands on top of a stool at the sight of Jerry the mouse. I was standing up on my bed, and shouting out loud, "Get the fuck out of here, to these cockroaches, who in my mind's eye, were scurrying about the floor, walls and now the ceiling. Though obviously they weren't really there, yet were as real as could be. I'm not even sure how long that trip lasted. The bloke I was sharing the cell, in some respects wished he had taken a trip as well, because I was driving him mad with my incessant rambling and other crazy antics, like dancing and singing all night long. The screw's prison officers wouldn't dare come onto the wing for almost 3 days, as all they could see were droves of demented prisoners roaming around the wing. It was a funny time and I don't regret the experience, though I really don't recommend taking these sorts of drugs, if your mind is not so clear or too strong to begin with. Image detail. What bad acid can make you feel like? John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas group organized the Monterey Festival. Phillips' own history and experimentation with drugs is widely known, and he was closely tied in with a Satanist network among who were Charles Manson, Roman Polanski, Bobby Psell, and Kenneth Anger. In September 2009, John Phillips' daughter Mackenzie Phillips claimed in a book, High on Arrival, that she and her father had a 10-year incestuous relationship, 10-10A. She stated that the relationship began when she was 18 years old in 1979, after Phillips raped her while they were both under the influence of heavy narcotics on the eve of her first marriage, and was more of the sort of thing the Roman Emperor Caligula would get up to, as he used it as a form of bestowing honor, and showing his real power. Image detail. Mackenzie Phillips with loving dad John Phillips. Phillips appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show, 10, on the 23rd of September 2009 in which she told Winfrey that her father injected her with cocaine and heroin, known as speed bling, which has attributed to the deaths of many people and even celebrities such as John Belushi and River Phoenix died this way. According to Phillips, the incestuous relationship ended when she became pregnant and did not know who had fathered the child. These doubts resulted in an abortion, which her father paid for, and I never let him touch me again. Yet his first and second wife, and some other family members, say they don't believe what Mackenzie said about her father. Though I find those denials even harder to believe, as why on earth would she make up such a sickening claim about her own father if it wasn't true? It's hardly the sort of thing you'd boast about. And anyhow, that kind of thing would have been done discreetly, and it was obviously with Mackenzie's own consent, and until she said no. So why does anyone else think they would have known about it in the first place? A board of directors were appointed by Phillips to promote and finance the concert. The board included Andrew Oldham, the Rolling Stones manager, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney and record producer Terry Melcher, the son of Doris Day. It was the first time that an American audience had seen The Who and Jimi Hendrix. At the conclusion of their act, The Who were apparently stoned out their heads, and destroyed all their equipment, whilst Hendrix simulated wanking off his guitar. There was massive open use of drugs, and author Robert Santelli, in his book, Aquarius Rising, writes, LSD was in abundance at Monterey. Dabs of Monterey Purple were literally given to anyone wishing to experiment a little. The police made no arrests, and set a precedent for future outdoor concerts, as there was a larger scheme in operation tied into MKUltra project, involving Phillips, along with CIA agents such as Ken Kesey and Timothy Leary. At Stanford in 1959, Kesey volunteered to take part in a CIA-financed study named Project MKUltra at the Menlo Park Veterans Hospital. Image detail. Charles Manson's The Family. The project studied the effects of psychoactive drugs, particularly LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, cocaine, AMT and DMT on people. He frequently entertained friends and many others with parties he called acid tests involving music, such as Kesey's favorite band, the Wallocks, later known as the Grateful Dead, black lights, fluorescent paint, strobes and other psychedelic effects, and of course, LSD. And it could be argued that due to this lifestyle, it warranted Kesey to be able to write One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in the first place. The song, San Francisco, which sold over 5 million copies, and Phillips had written the music to it, and called for the youth throughout the country to come to San Francisco with flowers in their hair. The song acted a rallying cry to tens of thousands who came flooding into San Francisco in the summer of love in 1968 to join the new hippie movement, some who became the prey to the likes of Charles Manson, who recruited his cult family exclusively from misfits and runaway youngsters. Manson has been portrayed as a crazed lone wolf who had hypnotic power over his family. 11. Though in reality, Manson was well known to a whole network of Hollywood actors, actresses, promoters, partners and rock stars, and was providing sex and drugs to many of them. Image detail. Charles Manson, still alive and kicking today. In John Phillips' autobiography, Papa John, he tells of an invitation he received to join Terry Melcher and Beach Boy member Dennis Wilson, at Wilson's mansion. Wilson said, "This guy Charlie's here with all these great-looking chicks. He plays guitar and he's a real wild guy. He has all these chicks hanging out like servants. You can come over and just screw any of them you want. It's a great party." Manson's entire family moved into the Beach Boys' mansion for nearly a year. On Sunday, the 10th of August 1969, Manson sent 4 members of his cult for their last visit to Melcher's house. This time Melcher wasn't there, but the actress Sharon Tate, wife of movie director Roman Polanski, and 3 others were. When the group left, Tate and the others had been savagely mutilated and murdered. As for Phillips, in June 1980, he was arrested for running a large-scale drug wholesaling operation. Time magazine termed the Woodstock Music and Art Fair concert as an Aquarian festival and history's largest happening. The Aquarian age signifies the age of Pisces, as the age of Christ comes to an end. There are 12 astrological ages corresponding to the 12 zodiacal signs in Western astrology. The age of Aquarius is either the current or new age in the cycle of astrological ages. Each astrological age is approximately 2,150 years long on average, but there are various methods of calculating this length that may yield longer or shorter time spans depending upon the technique used. Unlike sun sign astrology where the first sign is Aries, followed by Taurus, Gemini, etc. and then Aquarius and Pisces, whereupon the cycle returns to Aries and through the zodiacal signs again, the astrological ages proceed in the opposite direction or order, normally termed in retrograde. Therefore, the age of Aquarius follows the age of Pisces. Many astrologers believe that the age of Aquarius has arrived recently or will arrive in the near future. On the other hand, some believe that the age of Aquarius arrived up to 5 centuries ago, or will not start until 6 centuries from now, so in other words no one has a clue and it's all guesswork. 12. Image detail. Woodstock aerial view. Image detail. With plenty of Woodstock. In John Phillips' autobiography, Papa John, he tells of an invitation he received to join Terry Melcher and Beach Boy member Dennis Wilson, at Wilson's mansion. Wilson said, "This guy Charlie's here with all these great-looking chicks. He plays guitar and he's a real wild guy. He has all these chicks hanging out like servants. You can come over and just screw any of them you want. It's a great party." Manson's entire family moved into the Beach Boys' mansion for nearly a year. On Sunday, the 10th of August 1969, Manson sent 4 members of his cult for their last visit to Melcher's house. This time Melcher wasn't there, but the actress Sharon Tate, wife of movie director Roman Polanski, and 3 others were. When the group left, Tate and the others had been savagely mutilated and murdered. As for Phillips, in June 1980, he was arrested for running a large-scale drug wholesaling operation. Time magazine termed the Woodstock Music and Art Fair concert as an Aquarian festival and history's largest happening. The Aquarian age signifies the age of Pisces, as the age of Christ comes to an end. There are 12 astrological ages corresponding to the 12 zodiacal signs in Western astrology. The age of Aquarius is either the current or new age in the cycle of astrological ages. Each astrological age is approximately 2,150 years long on average, but there are various methods of calculating this length that may yield longer or shorter time spans depending upon the technique used. Unlike sun sign astrology where the first sign is Aries, followed by Taurus, Gemini, etc. and then Aquarius and Pisces, whereupon the cycle returns to Aries and through the zodiacal signs again, the astrological ages proceed in the opposite direction or order, normally termed in retrograde. Therefore, the age of Aquarius follows the age of Pisces. Many astrologers believe that the age of Aquarius has arrived recently or will arrive in the near future. On the other hand, some believe that the age of Aquarius arrived up to 5 centuries ago, or will not start until 6 centuries from now, so in other words no one has a clue and it's all guesswork. 12. Woodstock attracted almost 250,000 people who gathered to get off their faces, and where many were in isolated locations, immersed in mud and filth, pumped with psychedelic drugs, and kept awake continuously for 3 straight days or more, and all with the full complicity of the FBI and government officials. Though again the same could be said about Glastonbury, that's one of the reasons it's all fenced in. Obviously it's also to keep those working-class scumbags out, as most attendees are more middle class, and at almost £200 per ticket you can understand why. But by having fences, it keeps those secured in, as well as keeping the others out. With your own security employed, then you don't need the police to get involved, and in a sense it's a hassle-free weekend to get rat-assed and off your face. Of course the organizers say drugs will not be tolerated, as do the police who even have sniffer dogs at certain times and places, but hey, come on for fuck's sake, this is Glastonbury. It's a bit like going to the circus and seeing no clowns. On the 25th of June 2010 2 men were being arrested after police stopped a vehicle on the way to the Glastonbury Festival carrying drugs with a street value of more than £100,000, 13. Over 100,000 Class C tablets were seized after police stopped the vehicle as it drove south on the M5 near Dursley, Gloucestershire, and they're the 2 that got caught. Image detail. Image detail. Glastonbury Pyramid Stage. Glastonbury is famous for its pyramid stage. At night you can see the apex fully illuminated, and nowadays they have a laser beam coming straight through the center of the apex and up into the night sky. The first pyramid stage was constructed by Bill Harkin and his crew in 1971 out of scaffolding, expanded metal and plastic sheeting. The structure was built close to the Glastonbury Abbey, Stonehenge lines and over the site of a blind spring. The pyramid shape is a very powerful structure, the apex of which draws energy up and transmits it still further while the energy from the stars and sun are attracted to it and drawn down. Those that saw the original pyramid at night likened it to a diamond transmitting almost tangible energy as people danced on the stage. In 1981 a permanent structure doubling as a cowshed and animal food store during the winter months was built on the same site using redundant telegraph poles and surplus box section iron sheets formed the Ministry of Defense. This pyramid grew to symbolize the magic of Glastonbury Festival before it famously burned down in 1994, shortly before the festival. In 2000 the phoenix rose from the ashes and a glittering 100 feet steel structure was erected with a massive footprint of 40 meters by 40 meters, 4 times larger than its previous incarnation. 4 kilometers of steel tubing, weighing over 40 tons were used in the build, and all materials and processes used passed a Greenpeace environmental audit. This current structure was designed and built by local Pilton villager Bill Burrows and is based on the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. 14. It's the most instantly recognized festival stage in the world, and for 40 years this summer 2011, Those who have been going to Glastonbury and dancing and singing in front of the pyramid, are participating in a occult pagan ritual whether they know it or not, and when you're off your face as many of them are, who gives a toss? Who said the Illuminati hasn't got a finger in every pie? Isn't that right, Mr. Athelstan Joseph Michael E. Avis? When in 1969 E. Avis and his second wife Jean Hayball visited the Bath Festival of Blues, inspired by seeing the performance of Led Zeppelin, they hosted a free festival the following year. This developed into the Glastonbury Festival as it is known today. Image detail. Artie Kornfeld of The Right with Glasses, with Mike. Security for the Woodstock concert was provided by a hippie commune trained in the mass distribution of LSD. Once again, it would be the networks of British military intelligence which would be the initiators. Woodstock was the brainchild of Artie Kornfeld, the director of EMI's Capitol Records Contemporary Projects Division. The original funding was provided by the heir of a large Pennsylvania-based pharmaceutical company, John Roberts, and two other partners. It was another pharmaceutical company, the Swiss-based Sandoz Laboratories, which had first synthesized LSD. Roberts would later be accused of using his company for the mass drugging of the attendees. Joel Rosenman, one of the three partners, writes, as the concert neared, food and water were clearly going to be in short supply, sanitary facilities overtaxed, tempers short, drugs overabundant. Worst of all, there was no way for anyone who wanted to leave. Sitting in your own excrement was actually part of the plan. As John Roberts jokingly wrote, "We're going to hand out bananas at the gate to bind our patrons." A hippie commune called the Hog Farm had a special role at Woodstock. The Hog Farm was led by a man nicknamed Wavy Graver, who was a former member of Ken Kesey's CIA MKUltra operation, the Merry Pranksters. Communes like the Hog Farm were commonly found in the remote parts of California and served as the breeding grounds for occult cults, as well as terrorist groups. Members of these communes continually interchanged with other communes and were the recruiting grounds for the Process Church cult and Charles Manson. Hog Farm member Diane Lake was a member of Charles Manson's family, at the time of the massacre of Sharon Tate and her guests. 1. Image detail. The Hog Farm Commune. Following the design of the original MKUltra project, the mass distribution of LSD came next, much of it in LSD-laced Coca-Cola, as Kesey's pranksters had done 5 years earlier. Roberts jokingly relates the following: a particularly abrasive cop had been handed an LSD-spiked Coke while directing traffic. Long after all automobiles in the area had congealed to a standstill, the hard hat was still out on the road waving them on. Finally they led him away. 1. The New York Times also reported, "Tonight, a festival announcer warned from the stage that badly manufactured acid was being circulated. He said, 'You aren't taking poison acid. The acid's not poison. It's just badly manufactured acid. You are not going to die. So if you think you've taken poison, you haven't. But if you're worried, just take half a tablet.'" The advice, to nearly 500,000 people, "Just take half a tablet," was given by none other than MKUltra agent Wavy Gravy. With a growing medical emergency on hand, a call went out to New York City for emergency medical personnel. Over 50 doctors and nurses were flown in. By the end of Woodstock, a total of 5,000 medical cases were reported. Sharon Tate murder scene. It's long been rumored that the death of Meredith Hunter that took place during a Stones concert at the Altamont Speedway track, just outside San Francisco, was a human sacrifice, as it's been alleged the audience were whipped into a frenzy, in open praise of the devil, and what some have since termed a satanic orgy, when Mick Jagger played the part of Lucifer in one of the band's new songs. At its conclusion, 4 people were dead and dozens beaten and injured. Well in excess of 400,000 people attended the Altamont concert with far less preparation than even Woodstock. Food and water was virtually unavailable, though drugs of course were in abundance. 1. Image detail. Meredith Hunter hunted to death. Following up on what Tony Sanchez describes in his book Up and Down with the Rolling Stones, the scene as people gathered at Altamont. By mid-morning there were more than 250,000 people milling around, and things were becoming chaotic. There was a lot of bad acid, LSD-DP, around, and people were freaking out all over the place. Everybody was getting stoned out of his skull to pass the long hours before the music was to start. Mexican grass, cheap California wine, amphetamines. By midday virtually everyone was tripping. A man was almost killed as he tried to fly from a speedway bridge. Another acid case, 16. Like I've mentioned before, this is exactly what a mate of mine tried to do. On the other side of the site a young guy screamed for help as he fell into the deep waters of a drainage canal. The stoned-out freaks looked on bemused as he sank beneath the surface. No one seemed sure if he had been real or a hallucination. It didn't matter anymore anyway, he was dead. Elsewhere doctors were kept busy delivering babies to girls giving hysterical premature birth. Tony Sanchez, Up and Down with the Rolling Stones. p.195. Image detail. I can fly like Superman. The Stones had hired the Hells Angels to act as security guards for the concert for a reported $500 worth of free beer, though their real payment, however, was in drug sales. When the festival did open, the crowd of nearly 500,000 people waited for more than 1.5 hours for the Stones to appear. It was only when nightfall arrived that the group finally came on stage. Mick Jagger was imitating Lucifer, and was dressed in a satin cape which glowed red under the spotlights. Sanchez next describes what he calls a pre-planned satanic ritual. As the group began playing, strangely several of the kids were stripping off their clothes and crawling to the stage as if it were a high altar, there to offer themselves as victims for the boots and pool cues of the Hells Angels. The more they were beaten and bloodied, the more they were impelled, as if by some supernatural force, to offer themselves as human sacrifices to these agents of Satan. Tony Sanchez, Up and Down with the Rolling Stones, p.199. Sanchez goes on to say that the Stones had just released Sympathy for the Devil, which quickly reached #1 in the US charts. The lyrics has Mick Jagger introducing himself as Lucifer, and as soon as he began to sing it at Altamont, the entire audience rose up and began going mental in a wild frenzy of crazed dancing. The Hells Angels security guards tooled up with pool cues, attempted to keep order whilst having a booze, smoking a spliff and dropping to odd acid tap here and there. When at one point a black 18-year-old Stones fan, named Meredith Hunter, rushed the stage just as the band finished playing Under My Thumb, and not the widely misquoted, Sympathy for the Devil. And it was here Hunter was beaten back, though he rushed forward again, and was pushed back again, pulling out a gun, and it's alleged he shot a Hells Angel in the arm. Image detail. Tony Sanchez was an eyewitness, and described the ensuing scene thus: 5 more angels came crashing to the aid of their buddy, while Meredith tried to run off through the packed crowd. An angel caught him by the arm and brought down a sheath knife hard in the black man's back. Then the angels were upon him like a pack of wolves. One tore the gun from his hand, another stabbed him in the face and still another stabbed him repeatedly, insanely, in the back until his knees buckled. When the angels finished with Hunter, several people tried to come to his aid, but an angel stood guard over the motionless body. "Don't touch him," he said menacingly. "He's going to die anyway, so just let him die." And it's because of this attitude, the name of the single Sympathy for the Devil, their other song Gimme Shelter and the name of their album, Let It Bleed, that gave rise to the speculation that Meredith Hunter's death was some kind of human sacrifice, and in some respects it could be viewed that way. However, I've seen the film footage of this incident, and pulling a gun out in the middle of a concert crowd, in front of the stage, and even more stupidly directly in front of a group of raving lunatic Hells Angels, then I think it could be argued it was more like a case of self-sacrifice, as opposed to a human sacrifice. That's been portrayed as being what happened here. Another thing I observed of the film footage is that it doesn't show Hunter shooting anyone. The entire group watched from the stage as Meredith Hunter was killed right before them, though it must be said, Jagger looked genuinely shocked to me, but then again he is a good actor. In addition, incredibly, the entire murder was filmed by a film crew hired to film the concert. Shortly thereafter the film was released throughout the country with the title of a Rolling Stones song, Gimme Shelter. In a book, The Ultimate Evil, journalist Maury Terry tells how satanic cults circulate among themselves snuff films of their human sacrifices. Terry relates that one of the 6 Son of Sam murders in New York City was actually filmed from a nearby parked van. Gimme Shelter first appeared as the opening track on the band's 1969 album Let It Bleed. And the 1995 documentary film was a box office hit, which also showed several other actual executions of people condemned to death. Image detail. David Richard Berkowitz, born 1st of June 1953, also known as Son of Sam and the .44 caliber killer, is an American serial killer and arsonist whose crimes terrorized New York City from July 1976 until his arrest in August 1977. After consulting with several psychiatrists, police released a psychological profile of their suspect on the 26th of May 1977. He was described as neurotic and probably suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and believed himself to be a victim of demonic possession. Shortly after his arrest in August 1977, Berkowitz confessed to killing 6 people and wounding several others in the course of 8 shootings during that period. He has been imprisoned for these crimes since 1977. Berkowitz subsequently claimed that he was commanded to kill by a demon possessed in his neighbor's dog, and later amended his confession to claim he was the shooter in only 2 incidents, personally killing 3 people and wounding a 4th. The other victims were killed, Berkowitz claimed, by members of a violent satanic cult of which he was a member. He claims that he joined the cult in the spring of 1975. Initially, he said, the group was involved in harmless activities, such as seances and fortune-telling. Gradually, however, Berkowitz claimed that the group introduced him to drug use, sadistic pornography and violent crime. 17. Image detail. On the 12th of June 1978, he was sentenced to 6 life sentences in prison for the murders, making his maximum term 365 years. He was first imprisoned at the Attica Correctional Facility, and was also given additional terms for assault and attempted murder. In 1979, there was an attempt on Berkowitz's life. He refused to identify the person who had attacked him with a knife, but suggested that the act was directed by the cult he once belonged to. He bears a permanent scar from the wound that took 52 stitches. In 1987, Berkowitz became a born-again Christian in prison. I'm not sure what's more worrying. According to his personal testimony, his moment of conversion occurred after reading Psalm 34-6 from a Gideon's Pocket Testament Bible given to him by a fellow inmate. In the same testimony, he stated that his obsession with and heavy involvement in the occult played a major role in the Son of Sam murders. 17. There are skeptics that don't believe Berkowitz was involved in any cult or, more importantly, assisted with some of the murders and he acted alone, etc. However, Maury Terry continued investigating the Son of Sam shootings before Berkowitz was arrested. Doubtful of the single shooter theory favored by police, Terry dug deeper into the case, noting a number of unresolved questions and inconsistencies that he first publicized in a March 1978 newspaper article. Eventually interviewing Berkowitz several times, Terry uncovered evidence that strongly supported the idea that a violent offshoot of the Process Church cult was responsible for the Son of Sam murders and many other crimes. After consulting with police and agreeing to withhold some names and other details, Terry publicized his conclusions first in a series of newspaper articles distributed by the Gannett Syndicate in 1979, and later in the already mentioned book, The Ultimate Evil, which has been expanded several times since its initial 1987 publication. Queens District Attorney John Santassi, who thought the case against Berkowitz was riddled with inconsistencies and unresolved questions, was so impressed with Terry's research that he agreed to reopen the Son of Sam case, but to date no one else has ever been charged in connection with the crimes. Journalist John Hockenberry also reported that the Son of Sam case was reopened in 1996 and, as of today 2011, it's still considered open. 17. Image detail. Anton LaVey, High Priest of the Church of Satan. The same year as Altamont in 1969, marked the beginning of the career of Ozzy Osbourne, who formed the band Black Sabbath. The group modeled itself on the Rolling Stones. The next 20 years would witness a procession of young drugged-out rock performers, like Osbourne, yet too many others have since died in drug-related deaths, and Osbourne himself has admitted his drug-taking obliterated his brain to pieces, and is no doubt the reason he stammers and seems to react more slowly than he did when he was younger. These young wannabes at any cost want to be famous and rich, each competing for the big money and the recording contracts that came with it, are all more than willing to sell their souls to the devil. The key criteria of those who would make it is their ability to portray decadence and evil. These were the heavy metal groups 1970s and 80s, and today's rap singers and alike are following suit. In 1985, the New Solidarity newspaper, which has since been forcibly shut down by the U.S. government, conducted an interview with Hezekiah Ben Aaron, at that time the third-ranking member of the Church of Satan, then led by its high priest, Anton LaVey. However, it's been alleged that many report that LaVey, a former circus lion tamer, was just a front man for the real high priest Kenny Thanger, the man who allegedly earlier recruited the Rolling Stones.